The leather strap cuts into his shoulder before the city gates have even disappeared behind him. That is the first thing no one tells you, that the weight announces itself immediately, not gradually, as though the satchel knows exactly what it contains and has decided, from the very first step, to make you aware of it. The morning smells of dust and donkey and the particular sharpness of a fire that was lit too early, before the wood was ready, and it hangs in the cold air like a question no one has answered yet. His name is Darius, not a great name, not a name that will appear in any inscription on any palace wall, just a name his mother gave him on a winter morning in Susa, a name that means nothing to the road ahead. He is 19 years old, and he has been chosen, and for exactly 3 days he believed that being chosen was an honor. Settle in now. Pull whatever is warm a little closer, because we are about to walk a very long way together across a world that no longer exists, on a road that was called magnificent by the people who never had to use it. The Persian royal road stretched for nearly 2,700 kilometers from Sardis, in what is now western Turkey, all the way east to Susa, the imperial heartbeat of Achaemenid Persia. On a map drawn in the clean lines of a palace cartographer, it looks like a promise. It looks like civilization made visible, and perhaps it was for the king who commissioned it, for the satraps who rode along it on horseback with their retinues and their cushioned sables, and their servants who carried the cushions. For Darius, it is a dirt path that smells of old rain. He passes the first road marker, a stone pillar carved with the king's name in 3 languages, and he runs his hand along it without stopping, the way you might touch a wall in a dark room, just to know something solid is still there. The inscription is flawless. The stone is cold. Someone chiseled those letters with enormous care, and Darius cannot read any of them, and it does not matter, because the road does not care whether you can read. What the road cares about is whether you can walk, and you can, at 19, walk almost anything. The body is still foolish enough to believe it is infinite. The legs do not yet know what 40 days of continuous movement will teach them. The feet, soft inside, worn sandals, have not yet learned to become something harder than feet. Behind him, Susa breathes its morning breath and goes on without him. Ahead, the road does what roads do. It is a small thing when you first look at it. A clay tablet no larger than a man's palm pressed with the royal seal of Darius the Great. That unmistakable winged figure, the Pharavahava hovering above the cuneiform like a god pretending to be administrative. The seal is wrapped in linen and placed inside the leather satchel, and the satchel is placed on Darius's shoulder. And in this way, without ceremony, a 19-year-old boy becomes an extension of the most powerful man in the known world. He does not know what the message says. He will never know. This is not an accident. The system is elegant in the way that all things designed by empire are elegant, which is to say, it is elegant for the empire and something else entirely for the person inside it. A messenger in Achaemenid Persia was not a courier in the romantic sense, not a traveller with a satchel of interesting letters and a horse and a sense of adventure. He was a link in a chain, a human relay, a body made temporarily useful by proximity to power and replaceable the moment that usefulness ended. The seal meant that no one could refuse him food at the royal stations. It meant that the station masters were required, under pain of the king's displeasure, which was a phrase that covered everything from a harsh letter to a public execution, to provide him with bread, beer, and a place to sleep. It meant that bandits who recognized the seal would sometimes leave him alone. What the seal did not mean was that anyone would help him when the road became something other than a road. What it did not mean was warmth or company or someone to share the particular silence of a mountain pass at midnight. What it did not mean, most importantly, was that he could stop A message with the royal seal had a delivery window, not written explicitly, not carved into the tablet, but understood in the way that all things under absolute monarchy are understood, without being said aloud. You were expected to cover roughly 25 kilometers a day on foot. You were expected to arrive. The king did not write the words or else on his correspondence, because the king did not need to. Darius holds the satchel against his ribs as the wind picks up from the north, carrying with it the smell of somewhere colder and higher and further than he has ever been. He is still in the lowlands. He is still in the part of the journey that resembles the stories. The road stretches ahead in a long, patient line, the colour of old bone. He adjusts the strap on his shoulder, shifts the weight from one side to the other, a movement he will repeat without thinking perhaps 40,000 times before this journey is over, and he walks. The seal presses against his ribs through the leather. Herodotus wrote about it with the breathless admiration of a man who had clearly never used it. The royal road, he declared, was a marvel, a triumph of Persian engineering, dotted with royal stations every 25 kilometers or so, staffed and supplied, designed so that a relay of mounted couriers could carry a message from Sardis to Susa in as few as 7 days. 7 days, he wrote, for a journey that would take an ordinary traveller 3 months on foot. He called it, in essence, miraculous. And he was not wrong exactly. He was simply describing a different road than the one Darius is walking. The royal road that Herodotus admired, the one that appears in histories, in the accounts of generals and diplomats and kings, was a system designed for speed, but speed of a particular kind. Mounted relay couriers, riding in short, brutal bursts from station to station, each handing the message to the next man and the next horse, could indeed move information across the empire at a pace that astonished the ancient world. The system worked, the empire functioned, messages arrived, but Darius is not a mounted relay courier. He is a low-ranking messenger, a Piradazes, and his journey is not 7 days. His journey is closer to 40, and the royal road he walks is the same road in name only. The stations exist, yes, but they are not the gleaming waypoints of imperial imagination. Some are well maintained, staffed by diligent administrators who take their role seriously and will provide bread and a dry corner without being asked twice. Others are run by men who have been stationed at the edge of a mountain pass for 3 years and have developed in response a personality that is mostly suspicion and a little cruelty. Some stations in the stretches between major cities are barely stations at all. A mud brick building, a sullen official, a storage room that smells of something that rotted before the last messenger arrived. The road itself is maintained in sections, and the maintenance is uneven in the way that all things maintained by a large bureaucracy at the edges of empire are uneven. Near Persepolis, near Susa, near the places where important people travel, the surface is good, the drainage is considered, the bridges hold. There out in the highlands, in the Zagros mountain passes, in the stretches where the last inspection was conducted by a man who wrote an excellent report and then went home, the road becomes a suggestion. Darius discovers this on the 5th day, when the path he has been following angles upward into a pass between 2 mountains and narrows to the width of 2 men walking shoulder to shoulder, with a drop on one side that has no visible bottom. He stands at the entrance to this pass for one long moment. The wind moves through it like something alive. Then he walks. The cold arrives on the 7th morning as though it has been waiting just beyond a particular ridge, patient and enormous, and when Darius crests that ridge before dawn, it greets him not like weather, but like a wall. The kind of cold that is not merely temperature, but presence. The kind that gets into the space between your thoughts and makes everything slower, including hope. He had been warned about the Zagros Mountains. He had not been warned about them in any way that prepared him for them. Warnings about weather, passed from man to man in warm rooms over warm food, lose almost all of their content in the translation. The word cold travels easily. The actual cold does not. What Darius encounters in the high passes of the Zagros is not the word. It is the thing itself, the iron weight of an elevation winter, the way the wind finds every gap in clothing with the methodical thoroughness of a customs inspector, the way the ground beneath his feet becomes stone, and then ice, and then something between the two that is more treacherous than either. He pulls his cloak tighter, and the cloak does what it can, which is not enough. Go ahead and adjust your blanket if you need to, because this part of the story lives in the body, and the body remembers cold even when it is warm. There are mornings in the high council. Try when the sky is so clear and so blue and so impossibly still that the beauty of it is almost offensive, as though the landscape is reminding you that it does not care about you, that it was here before you and will be here long after, and that your suffering and your sealed message and your king's name are all equally irrelevant to the mathematics of altitude and wind chill. Darius learns to resent beautiful mornings. He learns that a grey sky, threatening but not yet delivering, is easier to walk through than a perfect one. Rain arrives on the 14th day. Not dramatic rain, not the kind that falls in curtains and makes rivers in the road, but the particular rain of the high plateau, which is thin and relentless and somehow gets wetter the longer you stand in it. His sandals, good sandals, Susa sandals, were not made for 2 weeks of daily walking and 1 week of rain. They become something soft and sad on his feet. He walks anyway. By the 20th day, something shifts in him, not breaking, more like settling. The body gives up its objections and simply becomes the journey. The feet stop reporting their condition to the rest of him. The shoulders accept the strap. The cold is no longer a surprise. He walks in a state that is not quite contentment and not quite suffering, something in between, like a man who has been swimming so long he has forgotten what dry feels like and has made a kind of peace with the water. The sun sets over the plateau in long stripes of orange and copper. He eats his bread, he sleeps, he walks again. There is a particular kind of danger that does not announce itself. It does not come running at you from a tree line with noise and desperation. It does not wear the obvious clothes of threat. It sits beside the road, unhurried, in the shape of 2 men warming their hands at a small fire, and it watches you approach with eyes that have already done their arithmetic before you arrive. Darius sees the fire from a long way off. In open country, a fire is company, and company, even the wrong kind, is hard to walk past when you have been alone for 11 days. But something in him slows his feet before his mind catches up to the reason. The men are not travellers. Travellers have packs, animals, the particular posture of people moving between one place and another. These men have none of that. They have only the fire and their stillness and the way they do not look up when he approaches, which is more unsettling than if they had. Banditry along the royal road was not random. This is the part that takes a moment to absorb, that the men who preyed on messengers were not desperate, improvising criminals, but something closer to specialists. They knew the station schedules. They knew which stretches of road fell outside the range of regular patrol. They knew that a messenger carrying the royal seal was also, almost certainly, carrying the small amount of silver provided for emergency provisions and, possibly, small valuables entrusted by wealthy senders who had no better option. They knew that the messenger, alone, exhausted, moving on a deadline, was the worst possible person to put up a fight. The 2 men by the fire finally look up. One of them smiles. It is not a warm smile. It is the smile of a man who has already decided something and is giving you the courtesy of not making you figure out what. Darius grips the satchel. He does not run, because running is an answer to a question, and answering that question would change everything. He walks, steadily, without speed, but without hesitation, past the fire, past the men, past the moment, keeping his eyes on the road ahead with the focused attention of someone who has decided that what is behind him does not exist. One of the men says something. The words are in an accent he doesn't recognize, from a dialect of the Western Highlands, and he catches only one word clearly, a word that means wait. He does not wait. He does not wait. His heart is very loud. He walks another 6 kilometers before his legs allow themselves to shake, and when they do, he stops beside a boulder at the side of the road and puts his back against it and breathes for a long, long moment. The road behind him is empty. He stands up. He walks. The station appears out of the grey afternoon, like something remembered from a half-forgotten dream. A low-building mud brick, the colour of the earth it sits on, so perfectly camouflaged against the plateau landscape that you could walk within 50 meters of it and miss it entirely if you were not already looking. A thin rope of smoke rises from a hole in the roof, barely enough to be called smoke, more the suggestion of warmth than the thing itself. Beside the door, a mule stands in a state of such profound indifference that it does not even turn its head when Darius approaches. He envies the mule. The man inside is named Cyrus, and this is a deeply unfortunate name for a man of his particular disposition, given that it is also the name of the greatest king Persia ever produced. This Cyrus is not great. He is a small man in a large coat, sitting beside a brazier with the hollow-eyed patience of someone who stopped expecting things to be interesting a long time ago. He has been stationed here for 2 years. He will be stationed here for 1 more. These are not years he discusses. He looks at the seal, he looks at Darius, he looks at the seal again with the expression of a man confirming that the paperwork is in order before doing something he would do regardless. He gives him bread, flat, heavy, slightly stale bread, the kind that has been baked in bulk and left to wait for whoever next needed it. He gives him a clay cup, something hot, not wine, not beer, something herbal and lukewarm that tastes of mountain plants and good intentions. He gestures toward the back room, where 3 straw pallets are arranged against the wall, with the approximate warmth of a place where humans sleep when sleeping is the only option. Darius eats the bread. He drinks the warm thing. He does not speak, and Cyrus does not ask him to. This is the small kindness, not the food exactly, not the shelter, which is required of him by imperial decree, but the silence. The way Cyrus lets him sit in the warmth without asking where he has come from or where he is going, without inspecting the seal with excessive officiousness, without making him perform gratitude. He simply provides what is needed and returns to his own fire and his own thoughts, and gives Darius the only thing a man who has been alone for 3 weeks truly needs, which is the company of another human being who requires nothing from him. Outside, the wind moves across the plateau with a sound like breathing. Inside, the brazier ticks. Darius is asleep before the cup has fully cooled. In the morning, Cyrus will hand him 2 extra pieces of bread without being asked, wrapped in cloth. He will not say why. The storm did not care about the delivery window. This is the most important thing to understand about what happened in the Zagros Pass on the 26th day. That the snow came not because anyone failed in their duty, not because Darius sat too long at any station or walked too slowly through any valley, but because weather, ancient and indifferent, moved across the plateau on its own schedule and buried the road beneath 1/2 meter of white silence that no seal, however royal, could unseal. He waited 2 days in a hollow behind a rock formation that offered something approaching shelter, eating his remaining bread in careful pieces, sleeping in the thick way of a body conserving its own heat. When the storm broke, he walked, He walked through the aftermath of the snow, through the particular exhaustion of breaking trail in a landscape that has forgotten what a path looks like, and he arrived at the next station 4 days behind his expected schedule, frostbitten at 2 toes, thin in the face and alive, which felt like a significant achievement. The station master at Bisitune sent a rider ahead to the next administrative post. The administrative post sent a letter to Susa. Susa, by the time Darush arrived, had already heard that he was late. The official who received the message was a man named Artabanus, an administrator of middle rank, the kind of man who had built his entire career on the reliable machinery of imperial communication, who had never walked a road in his life but had extraordinary opinions about how quickly roads could be walked. He inspected the seal. He inspected the tablet. He inspected Darius with the eyes of a man totaling a column of figures. He said nothing about the storm. He said nothing about the mountains. He noted in a voice of remarkable flatness that the expected arrival date had not been met. He wrote something on a small tablet. He dismissed Darius with a gesture that contained, in its economy of movement, everything the Empire thought about the bodies that kept it moving, useful when working, invisible when not, accountable for outcomes that were not entirely their own. Darius stood in the courtyard of the administrative building in Susa and felt the sun on his face for the first time in weeks. The city smelled of spice and river mud and cooking fires and the particular smell of a large number of people living close together, a smell that, after 40 days of mountain air, was almost unbearable in its beauty. He was alive. He had delivered. He had covered 2,700 kilometers through weather that had no interest in empire, past bandits who had every interest in him, through passes that wanted to keep him. The assessment in Artabanus's ledger noted only late. Darius looked at the sun. He breathed. He thought about bread. His name was Cambyses, and he was 12 years old. And he lived in a house near the western gate of Susa where the road begins or ends, depending on which direction you are facing, and he had watched the messengers his entire life, the way other boys watch soldiers or priests or men on horseback, with a specific, luminous hunger, with the conviction that what he was seeing was the best possible version of a life. The messengers who passed the western gate on their way out of the city always looked to Cambyses like men stepping into something larger than themselves. They carried satchels. They wore road clothes, practical, layered, built for distance. They moved with the purposeful rhythm of people, going somewhere important, carrying something that mattered to someone powerful. To a boy who spent his days in a narrow house learning to tan leather beside his father, the messenger looked like freedom in human form. He did not know any messengers personally. The stories he had collected over 12 years of watching and listening came from other watchers and listeners, from the men in the market who said that messengers ate well at the royal stations, that they were protected by the king's seal, that they saw the whole empire in a single journey. These were the stories that men tell about difficult things when they have either forgotten the difficulty or never experienced it, which is a very human way of keeping difficult things alive and appealing. Cambyses had seen a messenger return once, just once, a man who came back through the western gate on a morning in early winter, ulking slowly in the way of someone whose body has made itself a deal with pain. The man was lean in a way that was different from ordinary leanness, the leanness of someone who has spent all their reserves on something enormous. His sandals were destroyed. His face had the particular quality of a man who has been outside in wind for a very long time. The skin tightened, reddened, aged by exposure into something that looked older than his years. Cambyses watched him pass. He thought, that is what it looks like when you come back from the edge of everything. He thought it was magnificent. He told his father that evening that he wanted to be a messenger when he was old enough. His father looked at him over the leather they were stretching. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, with the gentleness of a man who knows something his son doesn't, "Eat your dinner." Cambyses ate his dinner. He watched the road through the window. The road went west, into the dark, into the story he had already written for himself, into the future that awaited him with a patience he would not fully understand until his own feet had learned what roads are made of. There was a morning historians believe it was sometime in the autumn of 490 BCE, though the exact date has been smoothed away by time like a stone by water, when a messenger left the coast of Attica carrying a report that the world did not yet know how to hold. The Greeks had won at Marathon. The Persian army, Darius's army, the army of the greatest empire the world had then produced, had been defeated by a smaller force on a coastal plain northeast of Athens, and the man running south toward the coast carried this information in his body like a wound. We know the shape of the story, even if we do not know the messenger's name. He was not, in all likelihood, carrying a sealed tablet. He was carrying knowledge, which is a heavier thing, because tablets can be set down. What he knew could not be set down. He carried it in his chest, in the particular tightness of a man who understands that the words he is about to speak will change something enormous, and that this understanding itself is a kind of burden, and that he has no choice but to carry it to completion. The road between Marathon and Athens is roughly 40 kilometers. He ran it, according to the account that has survived in various forms across 25 centuries, without stopping. The terrain is not forgiving. There are rises and falls in that landscape, places where the path narrows and the ground is uneven, and the sun in an Athenian autumn is still warm enough to cost a running man something real. He arrived, he delivered his words, "We have won," or something that meant approximately that, something brief and enormous in the way that true things sometimes are. And then, in the most famous version of the story, he died. Whether this is historically accurate is a question scholars argue about in cool rooms with good lighting, which is quite different from running 40 kilometers after a battle. What matters in the space between history and story is what the moment contains. A man, alone, carrying something the world needed to know, giving everything he had to the act of delivery. Somewhere, in that same season, other messengers were carrying other reports back toward Persia, toward the palace, toward the king, who would receive news of Marathon and feel, for perhaps the first time, the specific cold of an empire, discovering its own edges. Those messengers' names are not remembered. The messages arrived, the world shifted, slightly but permanently, on its axis, and the road, the long, difficult, unglamorous, beautiful road, made all of it possible. Somewhere in the vast archive of the Persepolis fortification table, those thousands of small clay records baked hard by the fire that destroyed the city in 330 BCE, discovered by archaeologists 23 centuries later in the rubble of what was once the greatest administrative complex in the ancient world. There is an entry for a ration of grain and beer issued to a messenger at a way station east of the city, no name, a number, a date, an amount of grain. That is all. This is how most of them ended, not with a dramatic final journey, not with a story anyone thought to write down, but with an accounting entry in someone else's records. A number in a column, proof of existence without the texture of it. The way a footprint proves a person walked somewhere without telling you anything about the weight they carried, or the weather they walked through, or the particular quality of the light on the afternoon they passed. The messenger the entry describes. This unnamed man, this number in a column, had covered, by rough estimate, the distance between Persepolis and the eastern frontier of the empire and back again at least 3 times in the year, the tablet records. He had walked, in a single year, somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 kilometers. He had done this in leather sandals, He had done this in the heat of a Persian summer and the cold of a Highland winter. He had done this carrying messages whose contents he could not read, for a king whose face he had likely never seen, across a road that was magnificent in theory and brutal in practice. He had done this, and then he had gone home, or not gone home, because home for a man in his position might have been anywhere and nowhere, might have been a room above a way station, a mat in a barracks, a doorway he returned to in the in-between times, and he had eaten his ration and slept his sleep, and then risen and walked again, because that was the work. Not Glorio Ses, not recorded, not placed in the histories beside the names of generals and kings, and the men on horseback who carried the messages that ran faster than he ever could, relay by relay across the empire. Just the work, just the road, just the body, moving through the world with something that needed to arrive somewhere, arriving. The tablet is in a museum now, climate-controlled. Behind glass, the grain was eaten 2,300 years ago, somewhere between those two facts, between the controlled air of the archive and the warmth of a meal eaten after a long road. There is a man who walked and was never once asked how he was. He delivered everything. He kept nothing, and the empire, vast, luminous, and almost entirely indifferent, moved on, carried forward on the tired feet of people whose names we will never know, toward a future they could not imagine, one step at a time, in sandals that were always slightly worn through. Sleep well, the road is done.